should be with you when you think of cultural policy. Okay? Now, I have this little handout there that most of you already have, right? With the Chinese and the Japanese and the English. Now, this is the last item. Just to tell you what the concept of culture was about cultural policy. Like when Japan and China began to modernize. This book is called Translingual Practice, and it traces how Japan and China uses traditional vocabulary and concepts to understand what culture is, what civilization is, at the time when the West come to invade China and Japan and try to colonize it. Okay. So you see what is Wenming, what is civilization, right? It begins, understanding of these things begins as early as the I Ching. And it actually comprises, right, everything in the universe is civilization when it first started as a concept. And if you go to at the back, at the bottom again, the word culture in Japan, Hong Kong. These concepts are interesting. When the Japanese wants to translate the Western concept of culture into Japanese, they borrowed a traditional classical Chinese concept of 文化, okay? 文化. And it's a very interesting source. It's about the idea of cultivation. 凡武之興，為不復也；文化不改，然後加諸. If I cannot cultivate and civilize them, then I punish them through force. And that's how. So culture is the idea of cultivation. If I cannot cultivate them, civilize them, then I'll use military force to deal with them. And that was the early idea of cultivation. And then the second one, 文化內輯，武功內柔. Culture is used to transform people internally. Power, military force and power, is a way to soften them outwardly. So it's also about creating a harmonious, cultivated, civilized population. That was the earlier idea. That's quite similar to the earliest idea of culture in the West. So this is just about a point of reference. That, and in Hong Kong, when we talk about these ideas, we need to think of the sources, both East and West. Okay, when we think about these ideas. So that's a background about this concept. Now, then I'm going to tell you a story about how Hong Kong come to have a class-conscious and a colonial understanding of high culture and popular culture, and how this opposition was invented, not just in Hong Kong, but also in the other parts of the world. In the 18th to the 20th century, in Europe, there was a period when European kingdoms began to organize themselves as modern nation states. Nation building happened. And at the same time, it's also a time when empires start to colonize the rest of the world. So during that time, different groups of intellectuals in Europe were working under different banners of nationalism, romanticism, folklore studies, and finally, folk song collection. Because if you need to invent a national culture, you need to ask yourself, what is the culture of our nation? What defines our nation as unique? What unifies all the people living in Germany? What unifies everyone living in Italy? Right? These are Prussia and Italy were the first nations created in 1870. Right? So they invented the first concept of popular culture in Europe. Popular culture is a culture that everyone shares, and that's a culture that unifies us as a nation. And in China, this happens at the same time when China become a nation state, no longer a dynasty, an empire, but a nation state, a modern nation state. So China during the Maoist and the Republican period, intellectuals always also refer back to a collection of local folk culture. And even before that, during the dynasties, intellectuals have a history of collecting and studying ordinary culture and vernacular culture, everyday life culture in different parts. The vernacular is Sichuan, people speak Sichuan, like Cantonese people in Canton speak Cantonese. So these are vernacular languages that particular to the local. So it's everyday, ordinary culture and cultures particular to the local, like everyday humor. So they collect 順口溜，即係你練口簧，即係你睇而家。Today we have political cartoons. At that time, they have political jokes that are written into rhymes. So the government studies the kind of jokes and rhymes people pass around to understand how they feel about the policies of the time. So in Maoist China, there's a mobilization of intellectuals to go into the villages and the mountains to collect peasants and ordinary people's culture. What songs do they sing? What rhymes do they pass around? And today's government still collects folk rhymes called 顺口溜, which is a popular genre proliferating through word of mouth, print media, and now the internet. Beijingese people are especially fond of passing around all these 顺口溜. If you don't have a feel with you and you don't know what to say when you drink with people in Beijing and so forth. So this is a way of understanding what's the popular sentiment. And this was the idea shared both in China and Europe when they were creating a nation state, how they understand what popular culture was everybody, ordinary folks' culture. And it sounds like it's a new discovery to them. Okay. And the discovery of folk culture is part of the policy created to deal with nation building and the desire of the new dominant class, the new merchant and capitalist class. Or in China, the new workers' dictatorship, or proletariat dictatorship, depending on the context. It's the same everywhere. And it's a way to mold these people, and this is the understanding of culture as cultivation. Mainly because these two nation states are beginning to urbanize and industrialize. A lot of peasants come into the city to find work in the factories. Like in China, we have a lot of 农民工, right? When they come in big numbers, we call them 盲流. We have a lot of people coming from the rural areas to the city to work. And governments in China and in Europe don't know how to deal with all this sudden arrival of new urban population in the slums and squatters. And you need to civilize them, you need to make them follow certain rules. You need to give them identity cards, you need to set up a police to organize how they live, you need people to develop sewage systems, so on. And you need the people to have a same set of rules of living together in the city, so that you don't come into a lot of problems and a lot of conflict and a big mess. So they started thinking we need to give these people a similar set of values and a similar set of habits of living. And that was when they don't just collect ordinary people's culture. They impose a certain idea of culture to organize and manage these people. So this is, again, the idea of civilizing them, cultivating them, that idea of culture. And this was behind a lot of this nation-building processes and city-building processes. And during that time in Europe, especially Germany,